did you ever observe that when you are in a neighborhood with lots of rubbish on the floor, that then people come along and, and they just throw things on the floor as well? Well, that's broken window theory. Let's get into it. So what is broken window theory? Well, it refers to this phenomena that you can observe, is that when you go into a neighborhood and there are windows already broken, you walk by a house, it's deserted and windows are broken, that then people are more likely to throw in some of the windows that are not broken yet. And the same thing holds for rubbish. People are more likely to throw rubbish down on the floor when there already is lots of rubbish on the floor. Because they think, what's the point? Why should I clean that up? Somebody has to clean it up anyway.
I don't care.
So Wilson and Kelling in 1982, they suggested that signs of disorder, like broken windows, litter and graffiti, can induce other types of disorder and petty crime. It was thought that removing these signs of disorder would take away an important trigger of criminal behavior. And if that would be true, well, we could actually prevent a lot of crime by making sure that there's no litter on the floor. So putting the litter probably into the bin might prevent other crime from happening afterwards. That would have happened because people might have thought that nobody cares. So small things can have a big impact. And Wilson and Kelling thought that when we remove these signs of disorder, that then we would also take away an important trigger for criminal behavior. So cracking down on a very small type of crime might prevent more serious crime from happening. And here I have a little video that explains this more.
3 days before Christmas, 1984, Bernie Getz boarded the number 2 train in Manhattan and sat down next to 4 young African Americans. When the teenagers tried to hustle him for money, something inside Getz snapped. He pulled out a Smith & Wesson .38 and opened fire, shooting down all 4 men. Bernie Getz personified the community of fear that was New York in the 1980s. Politicians had tried reform after reform to stem the flow of crime through the streets of New York. But nothing was working. Street conditions indicated that anything was possible for criminals. Surrounded by unpunished crime, Getz felt justified taking on the vigilante mantle. In the process, he became a criminal himself. But everything changed in New York when 2 revolutionary thinkers arrived on the scene, David Gunn and William Bratton. In the late 80s and early 90s, they adopted a new approach to crime, cracking down on misdemeanors like vandalism and fare beating in the subway system. They scrubbed trains for graffiti, repainted them, and maintained a zero-tolerance policy for other small crimes. If you peed in the street, said Bratton, you were going to jail. Why adopt harsh measures towards small crimes when serious criminal activity was the deeper issue? Because sometimes the smallest things can act as a tipping point for something massive. By suffocating minor crime, Bratton and Gunn were experimenting with the idea by criminologists James Wilson and George Kelling, called broken windows theory. Broken windows theory says the perception of disorder in the community plays a huge role in the spread of crime. One broken window signals to a community that no one cares. So what's to keep people from breaking another? This is the sort of neighborhood where you can get away with crime. When no one cares about little things, bigger things happen. Crime grows and spreads like an infection. Consider yawning. Have you noticed how when one person yawns in a room, everyone feels sleeping? A yawn can act as an idea planted in your brain by someone else's action. Crime can be like a yawn. It's contagious. The smallest trigger can set someone off. like Bernie Getz. In New York in the 80s, Getz was surrounded by crime and disorder. Crossed one too many times on a dirty subway in a neighborhood where no one cared. He pulled the trigger. But it was just around that time that Braden, Gunn, and others began to take broken windows seriously. In 1990, New York had recorded 2,605 homicides. Over the next 5 years, under strict cleanup policies, crime rates plummeted. By 1997, the number of homicides was cut in half. The theory seems to work, but of course, disorder isn't the sole cause of crime, and community cleanup isn't the full solution either. There are 100 factors. Sometimes the issue of crime seems insurmountable, but broken windows theory says that if we just tackle the details, the landscape of crime might tip. We can fix broken windows and take ownership of the dark corners of our neighborhoods. We've always been told to pick up trash to keep our community beautiful, but perhaps if we pick up trash, we can help make our community safe too.
There is a fascinating study by Kaiser and others published in 2008 in Science, very good journal. And in that paper, they've done a series of experiments on the spreading of disorder. Like how one piece of disorder can lead to another piece of disorder. I'm going to talk about 4 different experiments that they did. And the question that they had was the following. Does giving cues that one norm is broken, and that's what they call the contextual norm, like one thing that you shouldn't do, but obviously people do it, it's just like one norm is broken, does that lead to other norms being broken as well? And that's what they call the target norm. Let's look at the first study. So here the target norm is littering. It's like throwing rubbish onto the floor. Do people do that? Or do people do that more when a context norm has already been broken? And in this first study, the context norm was there's graffiti at the wall, while a sign says there shouldn't be any graffiti at the wall. So what did they do? So basically in the Netherlands, in the city of Groningen, Kaiser and others, they attached little flyers to bikes in this small street. And these flyers, they said, we wish everybody happy holidays. These flyers were attached in such a way that the people coming back to their bikes had to remove them. They couldn't just cycle away with the flyer on it. So that they had to remove it. But then the question was, what do people do? Do they dispose it properly? Do they take the flyer and put it into the bin? Or do they take the flyer and throw it onto the floor? That was the question. Now the context norm. So basically they created an experiment with 2 conditions. One was they called the order condition, and the other was the disorder condition. And in both scenarios, they attached flyers to the bikes. And the way the order and the disorder condition differ is that in the order condition, you see it here in the picture, there are the bikes and there's a sign that says graffiti is not allowed. Yeah? No graffiti allowed. And in the order condition, there is no graffiti next to that sign. But in the disorder condition, there is the sign, no graffiti is not allowed, and next to it, there is graffiti. So this context norm that graffiti is not allowed is obviously broken. And the way they did that is really one of the coolest piece of research ever, because overnight, the researchers, folks like me, they went there and they put graffiti at the wall. So here we have the design. Flyers were attached to bikes in this little road in Groningen. And, they did this on one day where they had the order condition. There was no graffiti at the wall, while there was the sign, graffiti is not allowed. So the context norm is no graffiti, and people follow the context norm. There is no graffiti. And then they look at how many flyers do people throw on the floor from their bikes. But then we also have the disorder condition, where overnight the researchers, they broke that context norm. They put graffiti on the wall where the sign clearly said no graffiti, So the context norm was broken. And then they again attached flyers to the bikes and looked at how many people throw flyers onto the floor. And the beauty about an experimental design like that is that it's very simple, and ultimately you can compare these two numbers with each other. So how many flyers are thrown onto the floor in the order condition, and how many flyers are thrown onto the floor in the disorder condition. And that's what I do when I go to Groningen. That is that little road. It's exactly that road where Kaiser and others did that piece of research. So I'm so excited about this piece of work that on a weekend in the evening with a good friend of mine, we actually went to that road and we threw down rubbish ourselves just to relive the moment. And these are the findings, which are mind-blowing. So in the case where there was the graffiti sign and there was no graffiti, this was the order condition, 33% of the flyers ended up on the floor. The people didn't throw it away in the rubbish bin, but they threw it onto the floor. While in the disorder condition, 69% of the flyers ended up on the floor. That's a huge difference. So in the disorder condition, the contextual norm was broken and people probably thought, what the hell? Nobody seems to care, so let's take that flyer and put it onto the floor.
I don't care.
To summarize, only 33% of the people littered when there was no graffiti at the wall, next to the sign that said no graffiti, while 69% of the people littered when there was graffiti at the wall, next to the sign that explicitly said graffiti not allowed here. It's a huge difference. Let's look at the next experiment. So what they did here, there was basically a parking lot, again in Groningen, and there was a fence around that parking lot. But then there was a little way where they had opened the fence. That's exactly what you see here in the picture. But it says you cannot walk through here. And it says in Dutch, geen doorgang, like no entry. And it even has a sign that says the entry is 200 meters into the other direction. And that's the target norm here. And ultimately, the researchers were waiting there, checking how many people go through that fence, even though the sign says they are not allowed to do that. But then we also have the context norm, and the context norm is the second sign here. And the second sign says, geen fietsen aan het hek was maken. It basically says you're not allowed to attach your bike to the fence. So we have the target norm, you're not allowed to walk through here. And we have the context norm, which says you're not allowed to put your bike to that fence. So we have the target norm, no trespassing, not walking through here, And we have the context norm, which is you're not allowed to park your bike or attach your bike to that fence. And now what the researchers did, again, they had like an order condition where they had bikes next to that fence, but they were not attached to that fence. So they didn't break the context norm. They didn't break the sign, don't attach your bikes to that fence. And then they looked at how many people walk through that gap in that fence. And then in the disorder condition, they actually did attach bikes to that fence. So they deliberately broke the contextual norm, don't attach your bikes to that fence. And then again, they looked at how many people walk through that gap in that fence in this case. So we have the design. So there's the fence and there's a little gap in the fence, that people could walk through. But they could also walk around, which would have been a detour to get to the proper entrance of this parking lot. And again, the results were stunning. Like in the order condition, only 27% of the people who wanted to pick up their car violated this non-trespassing ordinance when the bikes were not locked to the fence. And in that case, only 27% of the people broke this no trespassing norm. But in the second case, in the disorder condition, 82% of the participants stepped through that gap in the fence. Again, that's like a huge difference. It's massive. So just because people had attached bikes to that fence and there was this sign, don't attach bikes to the fence, people didn't seem to take the other sign that serious. And this is a very consistent finding. They did another experiment. Let's jump into one about shopping carts. So what they did here, they went to a shopping center, to a parking lot in a shopping center. And again, the researchers attached flyers to the cars. They put a flyer underneath the windshield wiper and people had to take care of it. They couldn't just drive away with it. So again, the target norm was, do people throw that flyer onto the floor? And it was pretty obvious that you shouldn't do that. So don't throw the rubbish onto the floor. So what did they do? So actually they took shopping carts from this parking lot next to the shopping center and they distributed those shopping carts all around the parking lot. So here you see the picture of that. And there was a clear sign at the entrance to this parking lot that said, please return your shopping cart. So in the disorder condition, the contextual norm to return the shopping cart and not leave it standing around was broken. And that's what you see here. And in the order condition, it was not. We had the order condition where there were no unreturned shopping carts. So the researchers actually made sure that the shopping carts were all returned to where they were supposed to be. But then they also had the disorder condition. And in this one, they had these 4 unreturned shopping carts standing around, as you see on the picture, with a clear sign at the entrance, please return your shopping cart. So again, we have a very similar design. Flyers were attached to cars. And then we have the order condition with no unreturned shopping carts. And we have the disorder condition with unreturned shopping carts. And in both cases, they count the numbers of flyers that end up on the floor and compare it. And again, the result was pretty stunning. In the order condition, 30% of the people threw the flyers onto the floor, while in the disorder condition, with those shopping carts standing around, over half of the people threw the flyers onto the floor. One last experiment that was pretty cool as well. It's about mailboxes. And basically what they did here is they went to an apartment complex and they had an envelope which had like a transparent window in it and there was money in it. Funny side story, it actually wasn't that easy for the researchers to print something that looked like money without getting accused of fraud themselves. They had this envelope and it looked like there was money in it and they put that envelope into the mailbox but only halfway in it so that it was sticking out. So it looked like somebody didn't put it in all the way in. And then they looked at people walking by, whether they steal that envelope, yes or no. This is a pretty cool design. So here the target norm was don't steal. And they looked at how many people steal that envelope with money in it. And the different conditions that they had is, there was this mailbox and the order condition, there was no littering or no graffiti around that mailbox. While in the disorder condition, they had 2. In one, there was littered. So there was rubbish lying around that mailbox, that wasn't supposed to be there. Or in the second disorder condition, they had rubbish plus and graffiti next to that mailbox as well. Again, we have the same design. We have the envelope with the money that is sticking out of the mailbox. And then we have the order and the disorder condition. And in both cases, the researchers look at how many people steal the money. And the results really follow the other experiments as well. So when the area around the mailbox was clean and orderly, only 30% of the envelopes got stolen. While when there was rubbish next to the mailbox, or even graffiti, it was up to 27% that got stolen. So this is some pretty cool research that shows you that disorder can spread. So when something is broken, one norm is broken, people might think, why should I care about following another norm? Because nobody seems to get punished for that anyway. applied to crime, it would actually mean that, let's prevent the small stuff, because that small stuff would have ultimately evolved into bigger stuff. And in some cities, the police is really cracking down. They really crack down on taking off the graffiti from the walls, and they crack down on petty crime not because that particular petty crime, but because they know that it might spread and it might lead to other crime following after that. And that's the broken window theory. So next time you walk around town and you see a bit of rubbish onto the floor, pick it up. Pick it up and throw it into the bin. Because it's not just this particular piece of rubbish that you put into the bin, but you also signal to other people that people care and that it's not okay to throw rubbish onto the floor. So small things can have a big impact. And this works for the positive, but it can also work for the negative, for things like crime, graffiti, and rubbish or broken windows.